Hello, I'm Kimberley Dondo, Digital Content Manager, and welcome to In Conversation With, the podcast series that delves into the world of financial services and brings you face to face with some of the most notable figures in the industry. Listen as we discuss topics that are currently facing the industry and hear from visionary CEOs to disruptive innovators as we bring you a diverse array of voices and perspectives. We'll explore the challenges they faced, the lessons they've learned, and the insights they have to share about the ever-evolving landscape of financial services. Hello and welcome to In Conversation With. I'm Kimberley Dondo, and in today's episode, I'm joined by Mark Sanderson, Managing Director at Morningstar Wealth. Thank you for joining me today, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
So could you give us a bit of a background into yourself and how you got started in the industry and ended up at Morningstar?
Yes, so I joined the financial services industry the way most people do, by studying a totally different subject. I started off studying optometry, and that's what I thought I was going to be. And before I knew it, I was working as a pension administrator, and that just started my life in financial services. So I've done every job from the most entry level administration job to what I do now as the managing director of Morningstar Wealth for the Europe, Middle East and Africa.
Okay. I would say that being an optometrist is probably still a good fallback plan. But I think you're doing quite well for yourself now, so not necessary.
Well, let's see. My mum still hopes that one day I'll go and finish that, and I'll go and do my. She can say that her son went off and became a doctor, but for now I'll stick to what I'm doing.
Yeah, definitely. So for this podcast, we're going to be covering the topic of bereavement. So I wanted to start off by asking you, why is a proactive bereavement support a critical responsibility for financial advisors?
Well, I think the first thing I would say, Kimberley, is I think financial advisors actually are doing a pretty good job here by and large, because they know their customers, right? And I think good advisors have very good relationships with customers. But I think that what that means is that advisors are in a unique position, really, when it comes to these things, in that advisors often are let through a door for customers where they've got access to a lot of information we typically hold very dear and sensitive, like our financial information. But that then goes out into all the aspects of our lives, because when people make plans and set goals, they're thinking about relationships with their families and, the children or parents and spouses and these things. So I think that's the first point. And then I think that, because you're in that unique position, you also know you work in a space where there's a lot of jargon. There are complex processes. I found myself going through that process, and people feel overwhelmed, and people, there's a lot going on for folks. It's not just the administrative financial aspects of a bereavement. It's exhaustion, and it's loss, and it's uncertainty, and it's grief, and it's all those things. So I think making the advisor really be on the front foot and understanding that, and helping to make those plans is critical. And I think actually the point there is that the first step in making sure you manage bereavement effectively as an advisor is to talk about the inevitability of that when you're making your financial plans, and making sure that financial affairs are in order, and there is a clear estate plan, and there is wills, and there are all these things. So when we talk about proactivity, that's what I think about. Yeah.
And you touched on how it isn't just, the administrative process when it comes to bereavement. There is also a lot of exhaustion and emotion involved. So I can imagine for advisors who've built relationships with their clients for years, it can be quite difficult to balance, empathy with professionalism. But
how can they do that when they are helping their clients navigate this process and navigate their grief?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I suppose the first thing is remember to be human. You know, we are, death is an inevitable part of life at the end of the day, right? And so we're all going to experience that at some point. And so having that empathy in that moment is really, really important. What does that mean practically? It means it doesn't mean you have to be someone's therapist, right? But there are practical things that you can do. You can recognise the emotional weight of the decisions that are going to be made, so that someone might be vulnerable. You know, they might not be fully aware of all the decisions that they're going to have to make and the impact of those decisions. So I think avoid rushing things, slow down, you know, and simplifying. And so be very clear about what needs to be done, why it needs to be done, and the impact of that. And if you don't feel that someone's in a situation where they can make that decision, then slow down and wait. And I think we can do that. I think you should do that.
Okay. And what practical steps simplify probate and estate administration for bereaved clients?
Yeah, well, the first thing I suppose I'd say on that is that obviously depending where you live and the circumstances can be different, right? And so that's the first thing to recognise. So it's easy to assume that, you know, someone passes away in England or Wales versus someone passes away in Scotland, that will be the same process, and it's not. And so being aware of that's really important. And if that's not your area of expertise, then, you know, there's a fantastic network of financial professionals that deal in those areas. So I think, and advisors are great at networking specialist skills in when they need them. I come back to having a clear will, you know, getting that power of attorney right. You know, educate clients about the process, that there is a process for this. And I don't mean at the time. I mean, actually, as you're building your financial plan with customers and you're talking about that inevitable part of life, that you're not just making the administrative preparations, but you're talking about what it means and what to expect. You know, one of the things I've learned personally from my experience, my dad dying, is, you know, having a very clear written down plan, so that, you know, when something happens to me, that, you know, Chloe and Oliver and Ailey know where to go to get, my wife and kids know where to go to get, you know, the documents and the passwords and all of the things. So I think those practical steps can really help, and you know, having that plan. The truth is, most people don't know where to start when someone dies, and I think the advisor being that helping hand at the time, but also before, by just making those preparations. It's not something we like to talk about, but we can spend as little time talking about as possible by making a really effective plan.
Yeah, I think it is really important, because it's already stressful enough going through that process without also the added stress of not knowing where any of these other wills or life insurance, whatever it may be that you need, not having a hold of those would add to that stress, I think.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, including that conversation with the family. Because, you know, a lot of advisors, there's all fantastic advisors in the UK and beyond, and they don't just work with the individual whose savings it is, or the individuals, but they work with the families. And I think when families are of the right age, you know, being able to talk to them about, you know, how that plan's going to work and where things are and where to find things. And, you know, I'd become a bit of I'd taken that a bit to an extreme, so much so that, you know, where my mum had said to me, oh, you know, this special item of jewellery, I want to make sure that gets to my granddaughter or this other granddaughter. I said, okay, well, let's take a Polaroid of it. Let's write on the back of it who it's supposed to go to, and let's put it in with the documents. And she said, it feels unnecessary. I said, look, but the comfort you get from the plan, and actually once we did it, the comfort she gets from knowing that plan's there, even for those really small things.
Yeah.
So think of that in the big scale of things when it's the insurance and it's all those things. That's really impactful.
No, I think that also is a really good point to make, because I have read some horror stories of families falling out when it comes to division of assets and stuff. You know, they might just say, no, grandma said that she was going to give me that, and there's nothing written down. But having something as concrete as like a Polaroid that has the person's name written is irrefutable. So not saying that like it would ever cause arguments like in your family, but in other families, death, you know, creates such tricky situations for some families.
I've learned this my whole career in financial services and working in retirement for such a long time as an advisor and a consultant. And everyone says it won't be us. Everybody says that won't happen to us. But you'd be surprised, you won't be surprised how often it happens, because you see it yourself, and it can be the smallest things. It can be big things like the family house. You know, a couple of the siblings want to sell it and a couple of siblings don't. But how do we value that? How do we navigate that? So being clear about these things and being upfront about these conflicts that might emerge, I think are really valuable. And there's other things you miss if you don't make that plan. So even knowing that, you know, when you're settling an estate, there are certain expenses that can be attributed to that estate, but knowing which receipts to keep. And you find out after the fact, if only I had the rental car agreement, because, you know, that can be part of your estate planning, you know, so those receipts. So these might seem like small things when we talk about them now in the abstract, but in the moment, these can feel like really big things and not just cause conflict, but cause a lot of stress and tension in an already stressful, intense situation.
Yeah. And not saying that they make mistakes necessarily, but maybe it's just something that they miss in terms of advisors. So what common mistakes, because I can't think of any other word, do advisors make in these situations, and how can they avoid them?
So we do make mistakes, and we talk about this at Morningstar Wealth a lot, that it's not about, the one thing we know is that from time to time we're going to make mistakes. So if we know we're going to make mistakes and we can at least try and predict them, then we can solve them. So I think mistakes is the right word. Look, I think rushing to fix everything is probably a mistake. You know, sometimes you use the advisor or the expert, and you're doing it for all the right reasons. You're saying, the person's stressed, they're tense, I'm just going to take this all away and I'm going to deal with it. But actually, that can create a lack of transparency, and that can create a tension that doesn't need to exist. So I think, again, slowing down and making sure that clients are ready to make decisions, and giving them space to make decisions can be important. Look, I think it goes from bereavement, but it goes for every aspect of financial planning and financial services, which is avoid using jargon. You know, let's just speak in plain terms. Remember, even your most expert person, you know, so even someone who's worked in financial services their whole career, in that moment might just not be as lucid as they would normally be. So speak very clearly, speak very simply about what needs to be done. And I think most advisors are great at this, but avoid one size fits all approach, because we've talked about different places you live can impact things, different family constructs can affect things. You know, one of the great things about this modern world is there's lots of different versions of family, and so that also has impacts. And so not assuming that one size fits all approach, I think, is really important. So I think, and that's probably the biggest mistake that people can make in that situation, which is to assume that all clients need the same approach. You know, some clients want you to be efficient. Some clients want you to take everything away and just deal with it. Some want space. Some want to be consulted, and some don't. And so I think the key is just to slow down. You know your client anyway. You're a great advisor. You know your customer better than anyone. Just slow down and really make a plan that works for them.
Right. But I also wondered where the FCA regulations stand in all of this when you're dealing with something, when they're dealing with a client who's going through grief and trying to offer compassionate support? How do advisors stay compliant without overstepping? Obviously, I guess consumer duty can also be taken into a thought when going through this process as well.
Yeah, I can see that. I suppose my immediate thought on that is that, compassionate advice isn't at odds with regulatory compliance. In fact, it's central to it. And, I think we know that the FCA expects us to support vulnerable clients. They expect us to work with clarity and care and structure. And so I think actually compassionate, specific advice for that person in any situation is critical, but particularly in a moment of vulnerability, because you may not have a vulnerable client per se, but that event doesn't have to just be a bereavement, but lots of events can make them acutely vulnerable, and bereavement would be a good example of that. So, but I think being really clear again, in your communication, I think documenting things, don't underestimate the power of an email or something written down that the person maybe didn't understand the conversation in the moment, but they'll get something to refer back to later. Because I think that cognitive impairment in grief is a real thing, and the client may not be able to make informed decisions right in that moment. So being sensitive to that, documenting things, giving people an opportunity to read and write things down and respond in writing, although that may feel very formal at that moment when you're trying to show this empathy. Actually, that can be really powerful. That can be a really powerful tool for people to be able to reflect and think about their decisions when they've got space to do it.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier about being prepared before the bereavement happens, it being a part of the wider financial plan. So what tips would you give to advisors to, maybe when they're onboarding their client, starting from that point in having that plan for any bereavement preparedness?
Yeah, so I think first thing to do is normalise conversations about death. And it's sort of easy for a Scottish guy. When Scottish guys talk about these kind of morose and morbid things, people find it quite normal. But normalise conversations about death. And I get that we don't want to talk about it. We certainly don't want to spend every day talking about it. But, spending some time talking about it is really important. Encouraging, the estate planning can be part of the review. Has anything changed in our circumstances that can impact things? And that could be family circumstances, but that could be just financial circumstances. So estate planning can be regularly reviewed. There'll certainly be a talking point when we do those regular reviews. I think advisors are great at networking in experts when they need them, but you know your client better than anyone. There are tax professionals, there are legal professionals, and there are other trust and estate planning professionals that you can get involved if you need them. And I think you can do that. And so, giving people all of those options and thinking about, charitable giving, wealth transfer, all of these things, and introducing these things early into the conversation, so that we're not making these big decisions at that very difficult point, but we've talked about them, we've planned, and that's in our plan. So look, probably a lot to do there, but really I think that just starts, as I say, with, we don't like talking about death, but making that plan, getting that out in the open, confronting that conversation, and planning ahead can make it just that little bit less painful at the time.
Yeah. And finally, Mark, what's your top takeaway for advisors helping clients through loss?
I think we talked about it a lot, which is just to listen to that individual, lead with empathy, act with clarity, and be prepared beforehand. It's not a surprise to us when these things occur because, like taxes, death is inevitable, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's it. So I would say, definitely lead with empathy, act with clarity, and make a plan.
Yeah. Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Mark. This was a really insightful conversation.
It was a pleasure. Was all mine, Kimberley. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to In Conversation With. We do hope that you enjoyed it. Please do keep up to date with all our new releases via Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you get your podcasts from. You can also keep up to date with all our new content published on the Money Marketing website, as well as our print edition Money Marketing magazine. So make sure to subscribe. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. See you next time.